All right. So in this video, if you are one of those people that are interested in the AZ900 or Microsoft Azure Fundamentals certification, this video is for you. So in this particular video, we're going to be doing that what? We're going to be breaking down what the certification is, what it tests, how to study it, and how to pass it, right? Confidently, even if you're brand new. In fact, I was brand new. And I saw this and it looked scary to me. But once I took the first step, I realized that it wasn't above me, right? I will start by an analogy. When you were growing up, you had to learn a lot of things. You had to learn to walk. You had to learn to crawl. You had to learn to talk. You had to learn the difference between your hands. This is your left hand. You had to learn to tie shoes, right? And you always have been learning. Why? Because you are a human being. That's why you're called a human being, right? Because the idea is to continuously learning. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this to make you understand that there's nothing you cannot learn. There's what? There's nothing you cannot learn. There's nothing that's ahead of you. There's nothing that's above you. All you need to do is to take the first step and learn in a particular way that will make things easy for you by mastering concepts. All right, cool. Now, back to AZ900. AZ900 is a certification from Azure. You already know that. What I want to do is I want to break down what this certification covers, right? I want to break down what this certification covers, and I'm not going to come up here and say cloud concepts. Okay, what does that mean, right? So we want to break these things down into little bit pieces that we can understand, that we can at a level that we can understand, so that when you start studying it, you know what you're looking at. All right, so it does have several chapters, right? That it's going to test you for all kinds of reasons. So the first chapter is going to talk about cloud concepts, right? What? Cloud concepts. What are cloud concepts? So I'm going to break down these things in story ways. So one of the things is that companies host applications, companies host systems, companies host websites. For example, you may use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an application that belongs to a particular company. It's hosted somewhere. By hosted, I means it's housed, right? It has to be hosted on a server, right? Facebook is an application. It's hosted somewhere, right? So host means to house. It means it's contained somewhere, right? The same way you have LinkedIn installed on your phone, right? So that when you open it, you'll be like, okay, so now I can use my application. So your phone in that particular case is housing LinkedIn. But there is a server which is housing that application so that all the phones can have that application. So the housing part of it is what we call the cloud. Now, there are two types of the cloud, right? Starting with something called on-premise and something called the cloud computing, which is what Azure which is what AZ900 is mostly focusing on. But on-premise, which is a cloud concept, is where it started. So on-premise, it means the applications are being housed or hosted. Let's use the word host now on, right? Are being hosted in a physical location that belongs to that particular company. So LinkedIn, we have its on-premise. By on-premise, we're saying where people go to do the work daily, right? So they have a server there, right? A computer that's hosting that LinkedIn application. So that's on-premise. And then we have the cloud. The cloud is a public space where companies go to rent cloud space. So instead of LinkedIn hosting its own application, they go to Azure and then they rent the servers. And then Azure provides these servers to them. So that's the difference between on-premise and cloud. So because there are a lot of benefits of using the cloud compared to on-premise. In fact, what started was the on-premise, and now companies are moving to the cloud, right? So these are the main concepts. Now, you have public cloud, that is your Azure, your AWS, everything like that. Then you have your private cloud, which is companies that provide cloud but privately, they're not public. Then you have something called hybrid cloud, which is a mix of the on-premise cloud, on-premise hosting, and cloud hosting. Right, so companies, if they are migrating to go to the cloud, then they will have a hybrid existence. Now, when we move to chapter number 2, which is going to be cover Azure services, then Azure services are basically the services that you get to find in Azure, right? So what can I say? So think about LinkedIn. I'm just going to use LinkedIn as an example, or Facebook, right, or Instagram, because those are main companies that we know. So when you go to Instagram, they only not allow you to upload your pictures. There are different services that they provide to you. So one of them is you can upload your pictures and share with people, right? The other service is you can do stories, right? The other service is you can advertise, right? So these are 3 different services. And the like, and the like, and the like. There's also messaging. So messaging is a service, right? So Azure, I want you to think of Azure the same way. So they also have services. So they have things called virtual machines, which are computers that are hosted in the cloud, okay? And then they have things called virtual networks, which are networks that are in the cloud, right? Then we have storage accounts, which is where data is stored. By data, we're talking about if it's LinkedIn, all those messages has to be stored somewhere, right? So this data is that storage, right? And then we have services, which is where applications are actually hosted in a cost-effective way. Then we have things like databases, right? Databases is where applications are also hosted, right? The backend of applications is hosted in databases, depending on what type of application that is, right? So these are services. There are more services than you see on my screen, but these are services that you will be asked about when you're checking the AZ 900, right? So you just want to make sure that you can cover those things. But they're easy peasy and not difficult to understand. And then we're going to look at the core solutions and the management tools of Azure. So we're looking at Azure right now, right? So we have something called Azure Monitor, Azure Advisor, resource groups, right? So core management tools basically is going to test you in AZ 900 whether you understand monitoring, or you understand cost management, or you understand governance, right? So those 3 things. So what is Azure Monitor? So Azure Monitor is basically the CCTV of Azure, right? So this is where it monitors everything that's happening in the whole environment. I'm going to show you the Azure environment and how you can have access to it in a moment. But for now, we want to focus on the concepts, right? And then we have something called Azure Policy. So Azure Policy basically is something that allows you, or allows companies, to administer or to put rules into the Azure environment. For example, you don't want people to be doing certain things, right? There's a concept of regions. So if you don't want people to be deploying resources in regions that you don't allow, then you can use an Azure Policy to restrict that, right? So so Azure Policy are basically is a guideline to your administrators, or to the company administrators, or to people that work in Azure, on how to do their work within guardrails or within some certain guidelines. Okay, so that's Azure Policy. Then we have Azure Advisor. So Azure Advisor basically looks at whatever is deployed in your Azure environment. It could be virtual machines, it could be networks, it could be systems and applications, and then it will tell you how to improve those efficiently in terms of cost, right? In terms of efficiency, if you are maybe using something that shouldn't be used, or if maybe you need to upgrade something, right? If they see that, they can give you what I call the recommendations, right? As to, okay, here you need to use this particular service, it will save you money, things like that, right? So that's Azure Advisor. Then we have things like resource groups. Resource groups are basically folders, right, for organizing your work. So I'll give you an example. If a company is going to deploy different systems, right? For example, I'm not saying this is what happens, but I'm giving an example. let's look at Meta, for example. The company Meta, they own WhatsApp, they own Facebook, they own Instagram. So these are 3 different applications. So if they wanted to differentiate if they're hosting these applications in the same cloud, and if they wanted to differentiate between them, then they are going to have a resource group for Instagram, a resource group for Facebook, a resource group for WhatsApp. Okay, so that's what resource group are used for. They're not only used for that; they can use for they can get they just folders. It depends on how you want to use them, right? But I want you to think of them as folders that organizes resource deployments. All right. Now, if we jump to security, identity, and compliance. Now, here you got to understand 2 main things, right? So the cloud is a public space. So because it's a public space, it needs to be secure. Why? Because there's $1 billion companies that are hosting applications. There's $1 million companies that are hosting applications. So it needs to be secure from possible hackers or possible malware activity. So because of that, there are certain systems that gets implemented, and that's what we call security, identity, and compliance. Security basically meaning the policies and techniques that we use to safeguard the cloud environment, in this particular case, Azure, right? So you have things like authentication, which basically authenticates or proves who you are, right? So if you have multiple users, when those users are signing into the cloud, we need to understand who they are, right? Just like you have a fingerprint when you're going to work or wherever you're going, you have to show like an ID card to say this is me, right? Then we look at the ID card, then we can confirm, okay, this is the person, and then let them through. That's what authentication does. Then we have authorization. Authorization is, okay, you're now inside the building, but which rooms are you authorized to get into, right? So those things works differently. So you have because these are systems that governs people work in these systems, so they need to be authenticated to get into the systems, and then they need to be authorized to do particular things, to have access to particular things, right? So identity is basically around the user accounts, right? The people that needs access, the application that needs access, right? Compliance is basically talking about if your Azure environment is compliant with certain organizational compliance standards, right? Because companies do business together. So we want to make sure that before we put our information on WhatsApp, that WhatsApp itself is secure. So a compliance organization comes up with a standard, and then that standard has to be met. So all Azure environments that are going to be doing business has to at least comply by that standard. That makes sure people can trust their systems. All right, so that's number 4. Now, number 5, things like pricing, SLA, and life cycle. So pricing is very key, right? So in Azure, there are different concepts or different ways of charging resources. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is pay as you go. It means that, and it is one of the reasons why companies migrated to the cloud, because it became cost effective. Why? Because you are only charged for what you use. Think about it this way. If I was owning a computer, if I was owning an Azure, a physical computer, what will happen is as a company, when I say I'm talking about it, me as a company, right? I have operational costs, right, or management costs of that server on a monthly to monthly basis. Whether the server is running or whether the server is not running, or whether the server I'm using it or whether I'm not using the server, right? But when you go to the cloud, if you switch off your servers, then you don't get charged for the servers. You only get charged when you are using them, right? That's what pay as you go mean, right? So it allows companies to plan. It allows companies to only get charged when their employees are actually working, depending on what the systems are that they have in Azure, right? So pay as you go is something you want to make sure you understand for you to get the certification. Then you have things like SLAs and guarantees. So SLAs are basically service level agreements, because Azure is a public space So companies needs to have guarantees that when we host our application in there, is it going to always be up, or you're gonna tell us some date that the servers are down, right? So those are service level agreement because we're paying money. So you want to look at those things as well to understand them. What our SLI is, and when he says 99.95, what does it mean, right? So. And then you have things like service and life cycle, right? Which one basically talks about when Azure introduces it describes the stages an Azure service goes through from introduction to retirement. So they introduce a service, right, and then it gets into preview, it's born, and then it matures, people uses it, and then one day maybe they retire it because another service is coming over it. Okay, so that's service level. Those are the only chapters that you need to focus on. But there are different concepts that I'm not touching today. My job today is to give you the motivation to go and actually look at this for yourself. But, knowing that you can do it, like I said, like I did it with ease. And I've seen more people do it. The only thing is you need to have faith. You need to believe that you can do it. So this video is just breaking things down so that you understand that you can do it. Now, how do you study for the course? How do you study for the certification? How do you get the certification? What is the pathway? What are the resources? What do I need to do? So one of the things you need to do is I did the following 3 things. Now I'm going to show you these things, right? So go to Udemy and find a course called AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals with simulations, right, from this guy. I'm not promoting this guy, right? I'm not promoting him, John Christopher, but I took his course, right? You can decide to buy this course, which I don't recommend, but you can do is a subscription. The subscription is much cheaper. It gives you like a month of having, and you get multiple courses. You only not get this course, but you get multiple courses. If I actually say AZ900, right, a lot of courses are going to be showing up here, right? They're going to be showing up here. So taking the subscription just makes more sense than buying one course. That's what I'm talking about. So take this course because I took it and it worked for me, and I recommended other people. It worked for them. You can even look at those reviews. Worked for other people as well. Now, and then you go to Tutorials Dojo. Tutorials Dojo provides practice tests. Practice tests are basically, questions that are revolving around those chapters we'll be looking at. And when you take those tests and you take them multiple times over, you are going to get the job. You are going to get the certification. Period. Right? Easy peasy. Why? Because they will be like a lot of questions that cover some questions that you might see in the exam, some of the questions you might see in the exam, right? And then also they ask you and train you how to answer the real questions, right? So take those practice questions. I'm telling you, if you take these practice questions and you don't pass the exam, come back here and let me know in the description below. So that's Tutorials Dojo. So you go to Tutorials Dojo. Again, I'm not promoting Tutorials Dojo. What I'm promoting is that you get the AZ900, but these are the resources. Now, after you do that, then you go to after you go to Microsoft Learn and you schedule for the exam. Some people will tell you to go and read Microsoft Learn. If you want to do that, you can go ahead and do that. But in my experience, I never did that because I didn't like how they make it scary, right? Like it's all techie knowledge, right? And when you're starting out, maybe you don't understand what they're talking about. So these are the 3 things that I did. Now, the very last thing that you should do is get a free trial. Get an Azure free trial. All you need to have is an email address and a MasterCard or a Visa card. So go to Azure, just type Azure free trial, right? Azure free trial. I don't even need to. Right, so Azure free trial, and once you type Azure free trial, click on try Azure free trial, go ahead and sign up for the free trial. When you're taking that AZ900 course from John Christopher, you will be following what he's doing and you can actually see it, right? So this is a subscription I have, which is like a free trial, right? You can do the same things. I'm not going to show you in here because this is my There's a lot of things happening in here, but everything that you'll be learning, you'll be actually coming in here and following what he's doing, and now it builds interest and belief in you, so that not only are you going to pass the Easy 900, but you are going to pass the other associate level certification that will come after it. All right, so that's it. So remember nothing else. Remember this: AZ900 is testing understanding, not execution. So they're not really testing you to do stuff, but they're testing your concepts. But I think this is what I think. I think that you can do a lot more. You can do well if you actually see what you're learning. That's it. So remember to subscribe. Remember to like the video if you like what we're sharing in here. See you in the next one.